The morning of February 12, 1944, arrived cold and colorless over the Anzio beachhead. Frost clung to the shattered olive trees. Mud had frozen into jagged ridges across the cratered earth. In a forward trench of the British 1st Division, Lance Corporal Jack Evans knelt in the pre-dawn shadows, his breath misting in the bitter air. Before him lay something that looked absurd. A crude figure cobbled together from sandbags, a steel helmet, and a wooden frame wrapped in a torn greatcoat. German voices drifted faintly from the ridgeline 300 yards away. Then laughter, sharp, mocking. They had spotted it. Evans didn't flinch. He adjusted the dummy's angle with gloved hands, wedging it carefully into the trench parapet so the helmet sat just visible above the sandbags. His fingers were numb. His heartbeat was slow. He had been a tailor before the war. Now he was a hunter. The first shot cracked across the dawn at 06:20 hours. The bullet struck the helmet with a hollow clang. More laughter echoed from the enemy line. Evans slid deeper into his position, pulled his rifle close, and began to count. The decoy had done its job. The trap was set. By the winter of 1944, the war in Italy had become a grinding nightmare. The Allied landings at Anzio on January 22nd were meant to outflank German defenses and open the road to Rome. Instead, they became a siege. The beachhead stretched only 7 miles inland. German forces under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring held the high ground. They looked down on every Allied position, every movement, every mistake. The Allies were pinned against the sea, and the Germans knew it. Snipers thrived in this kind of war. The terrain was brutal. Open fields gave way to drainage ditches and farmhouses reduced to rubble. Visibility stretched for hundreds of yards in every direction. There was nowhere to hide. German snipers, many of them veterans of the Eastern Front, took full advantage. They used the ridges, the ruined villages, the skeletal trees. They watched, they waited, and they killed. The psychological toll was immense. Soldiers couldn't stand upright, couldn't light a cigarette, couldn't reach for rations without the fear of a bullet through the skull. Snipers didn't just kill men. They killed morale. They turned entire units into nervous wrecks. Medical officers reported cases of severe anxiety, men refusing to leave their dugouts even under direct orders. The invisible enemy became more terrifying than artillery. At least you could hear shells coming. German sniper doctrine was ruthless and efficient. Trained marksmen operated in pairs. One shooter, one spotter. They used scoped carabiner 98K rifles, sometimes modified Gewehr 43 semi-automatics for faster follow-up shots. Their training emphasized patience over aggression. A good sniper took 1 shot per day, maybe 2, then moved. Never stayed in one position long enough to be found. The doctrine was simple: create fear, disrupt operations, force the enemy to waste time and resources hunting ghosts. The Allies had snipers too, but they were fewer in number and often less experienced. British and American doctrine hadn't emphasized sniper training before the war. It was seen as ungentlemanly, even dirty. That mindset cost lives. By 1944, commanders were scrambling to build sniper schools, recruit hunters and marksmen from rural backgrounds, and develop counter-sniper tactics that actually worked. But knowledge took time. And at Anzio, time was measured in body counts. One of the most effective German tactics was bait. They would wound a man in the open, then wait for medics or friends to come help. The second target was always easier, slower, predictable. Allied soldiers learned quickly. You didn't run to a fallen comrade. You crawled. You waited for smoke. You prayed the sniper had moved on. But often, he hadn't. Evans had watched this pattern repeat for weeks. He'd lost friends, good men who made one careless movement and paid with their lives. He'd seen a lieutenant shot through the throat while issuing orders from a trench, seen a radio man killed reaching for his handset. The fear was infectious. It spread through the unit like disease. Men stopped talking, stopped joking. They became silent, hollow-eyed shadows waiting for their turn. But Evans was different. He didn't accept the terror. He studied it. He watched the German lines through a periscope for hours, noting where shots came from, how long between kills, the angles of fire. He saw patterns. The Germans were confident. Too confident. They believed they owned the battlefield, and confidence, Evans understood, could be exploited. It could become arrogance, and arrogance made men predictable. He began to form a plan, something simple but dangerous, something that required patience, nerve, and a willingness to gamble his life on a hunch. He would need to think like a sniper to beat one. The German snipers at Anzio weren't ordinary soldiers. Many had been selected from infantry units based on marksmanship scores and psychological profiles. Calmness under pressure. Patience. The ability to lie motionless for hours in freezing mud or scorching heat. They were taught to think of themselves not as killers, but as surgical instruments. One bullet, one enemy removed from the board. No wasted ammunition, no emotion, just cold, mechanical efficiency. Their training schools, established in places like Sennelager and later adapted for frontline instruction, drilled them relentlessly. They learned to estimate range by eye, compensate for wind and bullet drop, and identify high-value targets. Officers, radiomen, machine gunners, anyone whose death would create maximum disruption. They were also taught camouflage techniques that bordered on art. Natural materials, minimal movement, breathing control. Some snipers became so skilled they could remain undetected within 50 yards of enemy positions for days. The scoped Carabiner 98K was their primary weapon. Fitted with a Zeiss ZF-39 or Ajax 4X scope, it was accurate out to 800 meters in the right hands. The rifle itself was a masterpiece of engineering. Reliable. Smooth bolt action. The 7.92mm Mauser round had enough power to punch through sandbags and light cover. Snipers learned to aim for the head or upper chest. A clean kill meant no screaming, no alerts, just silence and confusion among the enemy ranks. But the real weapon wasn't the rifle. It was fear. German snipers understood psychological warfare instinctively. They knew that one well-placed shot could paralyze an entire company. Soldiers would refuse to move. Officers would hesitate to give orders. Supply lines would slow as men took longer, safer routes. The snipers' greatest achievement wasn't the body count. It was the invisible control they exerted over enemy behavior. They turned brave men into prisoners of their own trenches. At Anzio, the Germans had terrain advantage and experience. Their positions along the Alban Hills offered clear sight lines across the Allied beachhead. They rotated sniper teams regularly to avoid fatigue and keep pressure constant. Some of the marksmen had fought at Stalingrad, where sniper duels became legendary. Men like Matthias Hetzenauer and Josef Allerberger were celebrated within the Wehrmacht. Their kill counts published in propaganda materials to inspire others and demoralize the enemy. The cult of the sniper had taken root. The Allies, by contrast, were still learning. British sniper training had improved since the disaster of the First World War, where German snipers had decimated officers in the trenches. The School of Musketry at Hythe produced skilled marksmen, but the numbers were insufficient for a multi-front war. American forces relied heavily on civilian hunters and scouts, men who understood fieldcraft but lacked formal military sniper doctrine. Many learned on the job. Many didn't survive the education. Counter-sniper tactics were crude and often ineffective. The most common method was saturation fire. If a sniper was suspected in a building, artillery or tanks would level it. Wasteful, loud, and often too late. Another method involved using mirrors or periscopes to scan enemy positions, but this required time and exposed the observer to other threats. Some units employed their own snipers in hunting pairs, trying to outthink and outshoot the enemy. Results were mixed. The Germans had years of experience. The Allies were still catching up. That's where desperation bred innovation. Soldiers in the field began improvising. They built dummy heads from sandbags and helmets, raising them briefly to draw fire and reveal sniper positions. It was crude but occasionally effective. The problem was timing. One exposure wasn't enough. Snipers were disciplined. They might ignore an obvious decoy, waiting for a real target. Or they'd shoot once and immediately relocate. The trick was making the decoy believable enough to provoke repeated shots, and durable enough to last. Evans had seen these attempts before. Most failed. The dummies looked fake. They moved wrong. They didn't hold the enemy's attention. But he believed the concept was sound. It just needed refinement, patience, and a willingness to sit beside that decoy for as long as it took, knowing that every bullet aimed at the dummy could just as easily find him. He understood the risk. He also understood that doing nothing meant watching more friends die. So he gathered materials, built something better, and waited for the right moment to test it. Jack Evans was 24 years old. Before the war, he had worked in his father's tailor shop in Birmingham. He knew fabric, structure, how to make something look real from a distance. Those skills seemed useless when he enlisted in 1940. But at Anzio, they became his greatest asset. While other soldiers saw junk and debris, Evans saw materials. A wooden crate could become a frame. Sandbags could mimic a torso. A greatcoat, positioned correctly, could suggest a human silhouette. He understood that deception wasn't about perfection. It was about belief. If the enemy believed the target was real, it became real. He had always been observant, quiet, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. In civilian life, customers would describe what they wanted, and Evans would watch their hands, their posture, the way they carried themselves. He learned that people revealed more through gesture than words. In the trenches, he applied the same principle. He watched how men moved, how they exposed themselves without realizing it. He saw the small mistakes that got soldiers killed. And he studied the Germans through his periscope, noting their firing patterns, their favorite positions, the times of day they were most active. The idea for the decoy came after a particularly bad morning. A young private named Dawson had been shot while fetching water. The bullet entered just below his helmet rim. He died instantly. Evans had been 10 feet away. He heard the crack of the rifle, saw Dawson crumple, and felt the familiar surge of helpless rage. But instead of letting it consume him, he channeled it. He began sketching designs in a notebook, refining the concept over several days. The decoy had to look natural. It had to be positioned where a real soldier might be, and it had to survive multiple hits without collapsing immediately. Evans wasn't motivated by glory. He didn't want medals or recognition. He wanted the killing to stop. He wanted his unit to move without fear. He wanted to reclaim some small measure of control in a war that felt chaotic and cruel. Building the decoy became an obsession. He worked on it during rest periods, testing different angles, adjusting the weight distribution so it wouldn't topple in the wind. Other soldiers thought he was wasting time. Some mocked him. But Evans ignored them. He knew what he was doing. The psychology of deception runs deep in warfare. Humans are pattern recognition machines. We see a shape, and our brain fills in the details. A helmet on a stick becomes a head. A coat draped over sandbags becomes a soldier. Magicians exploit this instinct. So do hunters. And so do soldiers. The key is understanding what the enemy expects to see. German snipers expected careless Allied troops. They expected targets of opportunity. They expected fear to make men sloppy. Evans understood this. His decoy wasn't just a dummy. It was bait designed to trigger ingrained responses. Deception in war is as old as conflict itself. The Trojan horse. Fake tanks inflated to mislead reconnaissance. Dummy airfields bombed while real ones remained hidden. During World War I, both sides used papier-mâché heads to draw sniper fire. The tactic was hit or miss. Some snipers fell for it. Others ignored obvious traps. The difference lay in execution. A poorly made decoy insulted the enemy's intelligence. A good one played on instinct and impatience. German sniper doctrine emphasized discipline, but discipline doesn't eliminate ego. The best marksmen were competitive. They kept tallies. They took pride in difficult shots. When they saw what appeared to be an easy target, something visible but not quite exposed, it created a psychological itch, the urge to take the shot, to add another mark to the count, especially if the target seemed oblivious, just careless enough to be real. Evans was betting on that urge. He was betting that even trained killers had weaknesses. The terrain at Anzio played into his plan. The flat, open ground meant long sight lines. The Germans had scopes and elevation, but it also meant their positions were somewhat predictable. High ground, cover, clear fields of fire. Evans studied the ridgeline and identified 3 likely sniper hides. If he could provoke shots from all 3, he might triangulate their positions. Then Allied snipers or artillery could respond. It was a gamble, but it was a calculated one. And calculation, Evans believed, was the only weapon the individual soldier truly controlled. The Germans held every advantage. Their snipers were veterans. Their positions were fortified. Their morale, despite months of fighting, remained intact. They believed in their skill. They believed in their mission. And they believed the Allies at Anzio were trapped, bleeding slowly, waiting for inevitable defeat. That confidence permeated their tactics. They took shots that bolder, less experienced snipers might avoid. They lingered in positions slightly longer than doctrine recommended. They had grown comfortable, and comfort, in war, is a slow poison. The sniper teams on the ridgeline overlooking Evans's sector operated with brutal efficiency. Each morning, they moved into position before dawn. They used rubble, broken walls, and carefully constructed hides that blended into the landscape. Their spotters scanned the Allied lines with binoculars, marking targets, estimating range, waiting for movement. When a target presented itself, the shooter took over. One breath, one trigger pull, then stillness. Sometimes they waited hours between shots. Patience was their religion, but patience can turn into complacency. The Germans had been shooting at the same positions for weeks. They knew the Allied routine. Morning stand to, ration distribution around 0800, trench maintenance in the afternoon. They knew when men were most likely to make mistakes, and they punished those mistakes without mercy. The predictability of the battlefield became a rhythm they internalized. Evans intended to disrupt that rhythm, to introduce an anomaly that would demand attention, provoke reaction, and ultimately expose the watchers. Building the decoy required ingenuity and scavenged materials. Evans started with a wooden frame taken from a destroyed ammunition crate. He shaped it roughly into a human torso and head, using nails and wire to hold the pieces together. He stuffed sandbags into a torn greatcoat to create bulk and weight. The helmet was real, taken from a supply dump. He positioned it at a slight angle the way a man might wear it while crouching. He added gloves stuffed with straw, positioning them as if gripping a rifle. The details mattered. From 300 yards, through a rifle scope, it had to look human. The craftsmanship wasn't perfect. Up close, the decoy looked crude, almost comical. But Evans wasn't designing for close inspection. He was designing for distance, for a glimpse through magnified optics, for a split-second decision made by a sniper scanning for targets. He tested the decoy's stability by propping it in the trench and observing it from different angles. He adjusted the posture, tilted the helmet, repositioned the arms. He wanted it to look like a soldier taking cover, cautious but not invisible, the kind of target a sniper would prize. The terrain around the British positions was a patchwork of craters and low earthworks. No man's land stretched 300 yards to the German line, a wasteland of mud, wire, and the wreckage of previous assaults. Visibility was excellent in daylight, too excellent. Any movement drew attention. The Germans had turned the open ground into a killing field, and their snipers were the sentinels. Evans chose a section of trench that offered a clear line of sight to the suspected sniper hides, but also provided him with cover and a firing position. He would place the decoy in the parapet, just visible, and position himself 15 feet away, behind reinforced sandbags, with a clear view through his rifle scope. Timing was critical. He planned to deploy the decoy at dawn, when German snipers were settling into position and light conditions were tricky. Shadows and mist could enhance the illusion. He would leave the decoy exposed all day if necessary, waiting for the Germans to take the bait. Each shot fired would give him information. Muzzle flash, sound, angle of impact. Piece by piece, he would map their positions. Then, if the opportunity arose, he would shoot back. Not wildly, not in anger, but with the same cold precision the Germans used against his friends. The moral dimension of this plan weighed on him, though he rarely spoke of it. Using deception felt less honorable than direct combat. But honor, Evans had learned, was a luxury the dead couldn't afford. The Germans weren't playing fair. They were playing to win, and if a chunk of wood and fabric could save even one life, then the decoy was worth whatever mockery or doubt it inspired. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was trying to survive, and to help his unit survive. That was enough. The decoy went up at 6:115 hours on February 12th. The sky was gray, the air sharp with cold. Evans lifted the dummy carefully, positioning it so the helmet and shoulders were visible above the trench parapet. He wedged the base into the frozen mud and adjusted the angle one last time. It looked good, natural. He slid back into his own position, pressed his eye to the rifle scope, and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The world was silent except for distant artillery rumbling far to the south. Evans controlled his breathing. Slow inhale, slow exhale. His finger rested outside the trigger guard. Patience was everything now. He scanned the ridgeline through the scope, moving incrementally from left to right, searching for movement, shadow, anything out of place. The Germans were there. He knew it. They were watching. At 06:20, the first shot rang out. The bullet struck the helmet with a metallic clang that echoed across the trench. Evans didn't flinch. He marked the approximate direction of the sound and swept his scope toward the source. A ruined farmhouse, 400 yards out, second floor. He saw nothing. No muzzle flash, no movement. But the shot had come from there. He noted it mentally and kept watching. Laughter drifted from the German line, faint but unmistakable. They had seen the decoy and thought it was a kill, or maybe they realized it was a dummy and found it amusing. Either way, they had engaged. That was the first small victory. Evans allowed himself a thin smile. The trap was working. 20 minutes later, a second shot. This one hit the dummy's torso, punching through the greatcoat and thudding into the sandbag inside. The decoy rocked slightly but held. Evans traced the shot's trajectory. Different angle. A second sniper, probably positioned in a cluster of trees to the east. He made a mental note. 2 confirmed positions. He adjusted his scope and waited. The third shot came at 07:110. Another hit to the helmet. The impact bent the metal slightly, and the dummy tilted forward. Evans resisted the urge to adjust it. Any movement would give him away. The decoy had to stay as it was, damaged but still recognizable. He watched the ridgeline, barely breathing. The Germans were testing it now, trying to decide if it was real. The shots were coming faster. That meant curiosity, maybe frustration. By arrow 800 hours, the dummy had been hit 7 times. Each shot provided more information. Evans had identified 3 distinct firing positions: the farmhouse, the tree line, and a third, harder to pinpoint, somewhere in the rubble of a collapsed barn. The German snipers were spread out, covering overlapping fields of fire. Professional, disciplined. But they kept shooting at the decoy. That meant they were either unsure or unwilling to let a potential target go unchallenged. Evans's muscles ached from staying motionless. His eyes burned from staring through the scope. But he didn't move. Movement meant death. He thought about Dawson, about the others, about the fear that had gripped his unit for weeks. He thought about the satisfaction of proving the decoy worked, and he thought about the shot he would eventually take, when the moment was perfect. The mid-morning sun broke through the clouds, casting sharp shadows across the battlefield. Visibility improved. Evans could see details now. The texture of the ruined walls, the remains of a cart overturned in the mud. And then, for just a moment, a flicker of movement in the farmhouse window. A shape withdrawing, he focused his scope, heart rate steady. There, second floor, left window, a shadow behind shattered glass. The sniper was repositioning, maybe realizing the decoy hadn't moved in hours, maybe growing suspicious. Evans made a decision. He would wait for one more shot. If the sniper fired again, he would return fire immediately. It was risky. The muzzle flash from his rifle would reveal his position. But he had stayed hidden this long. The Germans didn't know he was there. Surprise was his edge. At 09:45 hours, the eighth shot cracked across the field. It hit the dummy's shoulder, tearing through fabric. Evans saw the muzzle flash. Farmhouse, second floor, left window. He didn't hesitate. He adjusted his aim, led slightly to account for the sniper's likely movement, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. The shot was clean. Through the scope, he saw the impact. The shadow jerked, fell, then nothing. No return fire, no movement. Evans had no way to confirm a kill, but the position went silent. He allowed himself one deep breath, then resumed scanning. The tree line, the barn. The other snipers would react now. They would know someone was hunting them. 10 minutes later, another shot hit the decoy, this time from the trees. Evans tracked it, aimed, and fired. The second shot was harder. The target was partially concealed. He couldn't tell if he hit, but the position went quiet. 2 down, possibly, or at least suppressed. The barn remained active. One more sniper. Evans settled in. The decoy was battered now, barely holding together. But it had done its job. The Germans had revealed themselves, and now they were paying the price. The duel continued into the afternoon. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist and turning the battlefield into a stark, colorless expanse. Evans hadn't moved in over 5 hours. His legs were numb. His back screamed. Thirst clawed at his throat. But he stayed locked in position, eye to the scope, finger ready. The decoy sagged forward now, helmet dented, coat shredded, but still recognizable as a human shape. And the Germans kept shooting. The sniper in the barn was cautious. He hadn't fired in over an hour. Evans knew he was still there, watching, trying to understand what was happening. 2 of his comrades had gone silent. That would make any soldier careful. But careful meant slow. And slow meant Evans had time to prepare. He studied the barn through his scope, noting the gaps in the collapsed roof, the sight lines, the angles. He picked the most likely hide and locked his crosshairs on it. Then he waited. At 12:15 hours, movement. Just a flicker. Something shifting behind a broken beam. Evans held his breath. Waited. Patience. The sniper was repositioning, maybe trying for a better angle on the decoy, or maybe scanning for the hidden threat he now knew existed. Evans tracked the movement, leading it slightly. Then the German made a mistake. He exposed his shoulder for half a second, adjusting his rifle. It was enough. Evans fired. The shot echoed across the field. Through the scope, he saw the impact. The figure spun, dropped. The rifle clattered onto the rubble. Evans worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent casing, chambering a fresh round. He kept his scope on the barn. No further movement. 3 positions neutralized. The ridgeline had gone silent. For the first time in hours, Evans allowed himself to relax slightly. He lowered the rifle, rolled onto his back, and stared at the gray sky. His hands were shaking. Adrenaline, finally catching up. He flexed his fingers, trying to restore circulation. Around him, the trench was quiet. Other soldiers had watched from a distance, too nervous to interfere, unsure what Evans was doing. Now a few approached cautiously. A sergeant named Harris crouched beside him. "Did you get them?" Evans nodded. His voice was hoarse. 3 positions: farmhouse, trees, barn. They're done. Harris looked at the decoy, then back at Evans. That bloody thing actually worked. Yeah, Evans said. It did. Word spread quickly through the unit. Within an hour, the story of the decoy had reached company headquarters. An intelligence officer arrived to debrief Evans, asking detailed questions about the sniper positions, the number of shots fired, the timing of each engagement. Evans answered mechanically, exhausted but precise. The officer seemed impressed. He promised to pass the information to artillery and recommend Evans for commendation. Evans didn't care about medals. He cared that the killing had stopped, at least in this sector, at least for today. By late afternoon, Allied artillery began targeting the identified sniper positions. Shells rained down on the farmhouse, collapsing what remained of the structure. The tree line was hit with high explosive rounds, shredding the cover. The barn was leveled. The ridgeline, which had been a source of terror for weeks, went quiet. German snipers, if any remained, withdrew to safer positions. The immediate threat was over. Evans retrieved the decoy from the parapet. It was a wreck. Bullet holes riddled the torso. The helmet was crushed. The coat was torn to rags. He held it for a moment, almost reverently. This stupid, improvised dummy had saved lives. It had turned the tables on an enemy that seemed invincible. It had proven that ingenuity could triumph over fear. He set it down gently and walked back to his dugout. That night, the unit moved more freely than they had in weeks. Men stood upright, smoked cigarettes without crouching, talked in normal voices. The psychological weight had lifted. They weren't safe. Anzio was still a death trap, but they had reclaimed a small piece of agency. They had fought back, and they had won. Evans sat alone, cleaning his rifle by candlelight. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory from months of repetition. He thought about the German snipers. He didn't know their names. Didn't know if they were dead or wounded. Didn't know if they had families waiting for letters that would never come. He felt no joy in what he had done. Only a grim satisfaction. The job was finished. The decoy had worked. His friends were a little safer tonight than they were yesterday. Outside, the guns rumbled in the distance. The war went on. But for this. One day, in this one small corner of the vast and terrible conflict, a tailor from Birmingham had outsmarted the enemy. Not with superior firepower or numbers, not with tanks or planes, but with patience, observation, and a dummy made of sandbags and wood. It was a quiet victory, the kind that wouldn't make headlines or history books. But to the men in that trench, it was everything. Evans finished cleaning his rifle, set it aside, and lay down on his bedroll. Sleep came slowly. When it did, he dreamed of home, of fabric and thread, of measuring tape and scissors, of a world where the only thing that mattered was making a suit fit perfectly. A world without snipers, without fear, without war. He woke before dawn, back in the cold reality of Anzio. But for a few hours, he had escaped. And that, too, was a kind of victory. The immediate tactical impact of Evans's success rippled outward faster than anyone anticipated. Within 48 hours, British intelligence confirmed that German sniper activity in the sector had dropped by more than 60%. Patrols reported abandoned positions along the ridgeline. Equipment left behind suggested hasty withdrawal. The 3 snipers Evans had engaged were confirmed casualties, 2 dead and 1 severely wounded, evacuated under cover of darkness. For the first time in weeks, Allied soldiers could move through forward positions without the constant terror of sudden death. The psychological shift was profound. Fear is cumulative. It builds with each loss, each near miss, until entire units become paralyzed. Evans's action didn't eliminate danger, but it broke the spell. Men who had been cowering in dugouts began volunteering for patrols. Officers noticed improved morale, better communication, soldiers joking again. One sergeant described it as like a weight lifted off everyone's chest. The decoy had become a symbol, proof that the enemy wasn't invincible, proof that cleverness could defeat experience. Other units heard the story and began experimenting with their own decoys. Some succeeded, many failed. The problem was execution. A poorly made dummy was obvious, even insulting. It had to look right, be positioned correctly, and most importantly, be paired with a hidden marksman ready to capitalize on enemy mistakes. Evans's success wasn't just the decoy. It was his patience, his observation, his willingness to sit motionless for 6 hours, waiting for the perfect shot. Most soldiers lacked that combination of skill and temperament. British training officers took notice. Reports of the incident reached sniper schools in England, where instructors began incorporating decoy tactics into the curriculum. The technique wasn't new. Dummy heads had been used in World War I, but Evans had refined it. He had turned a crude trick into a systematic method. Training manuals were updated. Diagrams illustrated proper decoy construction. Guidelines emphasized patience and concealment for the accompanying sniper. Evans had inadvertently contributed to Allied sniper doctrine. The Germans, for their part, adapted quickly. Intelligence intercepts revealed that German commanders issued new orders to sniper teams. Avoid obvious targets, limit shots per position, relocate more frequently. The decoy tactic had been noted and countered. That was the nature of warfare. Every innovation triggered a counter-innovation. The arms race extended beyond weapons to psychology and tactics. But even with adjustments, German sniper effectiveness in the Anzio sector never returned to pre-February levels. The damage to their confidence was real. Evans himself received modest recognition. He was promoted to corporal and awarded a commendation for initiative and bravery. The ceremony was brief, held in a muddy field behind the lines. A major pinned a ribbon to his uniform and shook his hand. Evans nodded, embarrassed by the attention. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had done what needed doing. The real reward was walking through the trench that evening and seeing men standing upright, laughing, alive. Journalists eventually heard the story. A correspondent from Stars and Stripes interviewed Evans for a brief piece titled "Cardboard Soldier Fools German Snipers." The article was light on details, heavy on morale-boosting rhetoric. Evans hated it. He felt the story trivialized the danger, made it sound easy. But the publicity served a purpose. It spread hope. It reminded soldiers on other fronts that the enemy could be beaten with brains as well as bullets. The broader impact of Evans's innovation extended beyond Anzio, as Allied forces pushed north. Through Italy, sniper warfare remained a constant threat. German rearguard actions relied heavily on marksmen delaying advances, inflicting casualties, slowing momentum. Decoy tactics became part of the counter-sniper playbook. Units carried prefabricated dummies, adjustable frames that could be assembled quickly and positioned in forward areas. The results were mixed but occasionally spectacular. One American unit in the Gothic line used a decoy to bait a German sniper who had killed 6 men over 3 days. The decoy drew fire for 4 hours before the sniper was located and eliminated by a Marine marksman. Another British unit near Cassino deployed multiple decoys simultaneously, creating the illusion of a careless platoon. German snipers engaged, revealing positions that were subsequently destroyed by artillery. The tactic was spreading, evolving, being refined by soldiers who understood that survival required constant adaptation. The psychological warfare aspect became equally important. German snipers grew paranoid. Every visible target became suspect. Were they shooting at a man or a dummy? The uncertainty slowed their response times, made them hesitate. Hesitation in a sniper is fatal. It breaks the rhythm, disrupts the cold calculation that makes them effective. Allied commanders recognized this and encouraged decoy use not just for elimination, but for suppression. Keep the enemy guessing. Keep them off balance. Evans' technique also influenced post-war military thinking. After 1945, sniper training programs across NATO incorporated decoy tactics as standard instruction. The U.S. Army, recognizing the value of counter-sniper operations, established dedicated schools focusing on fieldcraft, patience, and psychological warfare. The lessons learned at Anzio, in the frozen mud and shattered olive groves, became doctrine taught to generations of soldiers. Evans's name appeared in training materials, though often anonymously, credited simply as a British corporal. The human cost of sniper warfare was never forgotten. For every successful decoy operation, dozens of soldiers still died to enemy marksmen. The tactic was a tool, not a miracle. It required skill, patience, and luck. But it represented something larger. The idea that individual soldiers could make a difference. That ingenuity mattered. That the little guy, armed with nothing but a clever idea and steady nerves, could challenge the machine of war and win. Evans survived Anzio. He fought through the rest of the Italian campaign, saw Rome liberated, and eventually returned to England in late 1944. He was offered positions in training command, teaching sniper tactics to new recruits. He declined. He had seen enough, done enough. He wanted to go home. In early 1945, he was discharged and returned to Birmingham. The tailor shop was still standing, though the windows had been blown out by a German bomb in 1941. He reopened it, began taking orders, measuring fabric, sewing seams. The precision that made him a deadly sniper made him an excellent tailor. He rarely spoke about the war. When asked, he deflected, said he did his bit like everyone else. Friends and customers sometimes pressed for stories, expecting tales of heroism and glory. Evans would smile politely and change the subject. The truth was too complicated to explain. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a survivor. A man who had done terrible things for good reasons. A man who had learned that killing, even justified killing, left scars that never fully healed. In the decades after the war, historians occasionally reached out. Researchers writing about Anzio, about sniper tactics, about psychological warfare. Evans cooperated when he could, providing details, clarifying timelines. But he never glorified it, never made it sound easy or noble. War, he insisted, was ugly. Necessary sometimes, but never glorious. The decoy was just a tool, a way to survive another day. Nothing more? He died in 1987 at the age of 67. His obituary mentioned his war service briefly. Decorated corporal, sniper, survived Anzio. The full story wasn't told. Most people in Birmingham knew him as the quiet tailor on the corner, the man who made perfect suits, the man who never wasted words. They didn't know that he had once sat in a frozen trench for 6 hours, staring through a rifle scope, waiting to kill men he had never met. And that was fine with Evans. Some stories don't need telling. War is often remembered through grand battles and famous generals. Stalingrad, D-Day, Patton, and Rommel. But history is also made in small, quiet moments. A soldier kneeling in a trench, building a dummy from scraps. A sniper waiting in frozen mud, finger on the trigger, heart steady. These moments don't make headlines. They don't inspire movies. But they change outcomes. They save lives. They prove that warfare is not just about strength and firepower. It's about thinking, adapting, surviving. Evans's decoy was a simple idea, almost absurdly simple. Yet it worked because it understood human nature. Snipers are hunters. Hunters are drawn to movement, to targets, to the thrill of the kill. Evans exploited that instinct. He turned the predator's strength into weakness. Patience defeated aggression. Deception defeated confidence. And a man with no formal training in psychological warfare became one of its most effective practitioners. The lesson extends beyond World War II. Modern militaries still use decoys. Inflatable tanks fool aerial reconnaissance. Thermal dummies draw enemy fire. Drone technology creates false targets that waste expensive munitions. The principle remains the same. Make the enemy commit resources, reveal positions, waste time chasing ghosts. It's cheaper than armor, quieter than artillery, and when done correctly, devastatingly effective. But the deeper lesson is about the individual in war. Armies are machines, vast bureaucracies of supply lines and chains of command. They operate on doctrine and hierarchy. Yet within that machine, individuals matter. One soldier with a clever idea, one moment of courage, one decision to act instead of waiting. These things ripple outward, changing battles, saving comrades, altering history in ways no general could predict. Evans understood something fundamental. War isn't won by the fearless. It's won by the thoughtful, by those who observe, adapt, and refuse to accept terror as inevitable. His decoy was more than wood and fabric. It was defiance, a refusal to let the enemy dictate the terms of engagement. And in that frozen trench at Anzio, on a gray morning in February 1944, defiance was enough. The Germans laughed at his cardboard soldier. But for 6 hours, that soldier drew their fire, revealed their positions, and cost them the one thing snipers can't afford to lose: invisibility. And in war, that's everything.